They took the workshop on Alderman Road. They took the truck. They took his son. And they did it the way these things are always done. In offices with drop ceilings and men who charge by the hour and never once look up from their yellow pads. 6 weeks later, a letter arrived at a building in downtown Nashville, and the woman who opened it read the name at the bottom twice before she understood that the man who had signed it was the same man she had watched eat cereal for dinner 3 nights running in a rented room above a tire shop. Reed Calloway did not know she had opened it yet. He was under a sink. The workshop had been his father's before it was his. 1,400 square feet on a gravel lot off Alderman Road in Murfreesboro, Tennessee, with a wood stove in the corner that drew crooked and a rolling door that stuck in the cold unless you knew the trick of it, which was to lift and pull at the same time and lean your weight into the left side. Reed knew the trick. He had learned it at 11, standing beside a man who smelled of pine resin and black coffee and who believed that a thing built with your hands was a different category of thing than anything else in the world. Kristen had called the workshop a liability. She said it the way she said most things about his work, without cruelty, which was somehow worse than cruelty because it left no edge to push back against. She said it was not an income. She said it was not a plan. She said these things to her mother on the phone in the kitchen while Reed stood in the hallway and understood, not for the first time, that he was the subject of a conversation he had not been invited to join. She filed in March. She had the house refinanced into her name by January. The truck title transferred in February. The filing came in March, and by May the temporary order gave her primary custody of their son, Archer, who was 7 and who had his father's gap between his front teeth and his mother's way of going quiet when he was thinking hard about something. Reed was left with the workshop and $240 and a visitation schedule, printed on pale yellow paper, that gave him Archer on alternating weekends and 1 evening per week, Wednesdays, between 5 and 7:30, which was not enough time to do anything except drive there and drive back and hold the shape of the boy in his hands for a while before he had to give it back. He did not argue the terms. He had no lawyer who could argue them well, and the one he had consulted briefly had looked the financial disclosure. Reed filled out and said, with the particular gentleness of someone delivering a terminal prognosis, that what he was looking at was not a strong position from which to contest primary custody. What Kristen had not asked for was the workshop. She had walked past it every year of their marriage without once going inside, and she called what was inside it what she had always called it: sawdust and noise, his father's old tools. A table saw that would kill somebody someday. A pair of wooden toolboxes, she said, belonged at an auction house for people with more money than sense. She told him to take his clutter, so he did. He loaded the toolboxes into a borrowed trailer and drove them to the workshop, and set them on the floor beside the wood stove and stood looking at them for a while, the way you look at the last thing left. The workshop had electricity and cold running water, and a small bathroom that froze if the temperature dropped below 20. Reed moved a cot in on a Sunday and slept under 3 wool blankets with his coat on, and woke to the smell of sawdust that had been in the walls for 30 years, and understood that the smell was the closest thing he had left to his father's voice. On his first Wednesday with Archer, the boy came in through the rolling door and stood in the middle of the floor, and turned in a slow circle the way children do when they are calculating something they do not yet have language for. He was wearing a backpack he had not taken off. He looked at the cot. He looked at the wood stove. He looked at the 2 toolboxes against the wall. "Is this where you live now?" he asked. "For now," Reed said. Archer nodded. He set his backpack down with great care, unzipped the front pocket, and removed a plastic dinosaur, the green stegosaurus he had carried in his pocket since he was 4, and he set it on top of the nearest toolbox like a person placing a flag. Reed looked at that small green dinosaur on the worn wood of his father's toolbox for a long time after Archer went back to Kristen that evening. He did not move it. The county sent a parenting coordinator named Holt, Perry Holt, who introduced himself in the parking lot of the workshop with a handshake that lasted exactly the right length of time, and said he had been assigned by the Davidson County Family Court to assess the residential situation and make a recommendation ahead of the modification hearing in the fall. He had a lanyard and a canvas bag, and the patient slightly wind-burned face of a man who spent most of his professional life outdoors, in difficult weather. He took a photograph of the cot. He measured the distance from the bathroom to the nearest smoke detector. He asked about income in the particular tone courts use for that word, the one that strips it of all its texture and leaves only the number. "I'm working on a contract," Reed said. Holt wrote that down without inflection and asked whether the contract had been signed. Not yet. He wrote that down too. What Reed did not tell him was that the contract in question was with a music label out of Nashville that had been licensing handmade acoustic guitar bodies from a luthier named Sam Pruitt, who had retired the previous spring and recommended Reed as his replacement. Sam had given Reed his first proper commission 8 years ago and had written 3 sentences about Reed's work in an email to the label's A&R director that Reed had not asked him to write and had not known about until the label called. Reed did not tell Holt any of this because the contract was not signed. A thing that is not signed is not a fact the way a court understands facts, and Reed had learned, in the month since March, that presenting unverified things to courts invited a particular kind of damage that was difficult to undo. He kept the contract folder in the second toolbox under a canvas tarp, because a man living in a workshop who claimed a music label was about to pay him real money looked, in the language of court documents, like exactly the kind of person the file had already decided he was. Kristen moved the Wednesday window. She texted that Archer had homework. She texted that Archer was tired. She texted that 5 to 7:30 was inconvenient given his new after-school schedule, and suggested Reed might consider the first Saturday of the month instead, which was not alternating weekends, which was not the agreement, but which she offered with the pleasant reasonableness of someone who has already decided the outcome and is offering you the chance to arrive at it voluntarily. Reed read each message at the workbench and did not write back what he wanted to write. He wrote Archer a letter instead. He wrote it in pencil on the back of a piece of sandpaper because the only paper he had on hand was in the printer cartridge, and the cartridge was dry. He wrote about a piece of spruce he was working, how the grain ran tight and even, and how you could tell, by drawing your thumbnail across it, whether the tree had grown fast or slow, and how a slow-grown tree made a better top, because the rings were closer together and the wood moved differently under string tension, the way something that has taken its time always holds together better than something that was rushed. He did not put a single word about Kristen in it, though there were many he had ready and would not use. He sent it in an envelope he had to borrow from the woman at the tire shop downstairs, who handed it to him without comment and went back to her invoices. Perry Holt came back on a Tuesday morning, 20 minutes before he was expected, and found the rolling door up and Archer there on a low stool with a piece of scrap maple in his lap, watching his father use a spokeshave to take thin curls off the edge of a guitar side. The curl came off in a single clean ribbon, and Archer caught it before it fell and held it up to the light from the door. "It goes see-through," he said. "Because it's thin enough," Reed told him. "Hold it up higher." Archer held it higher and turned it, and the light moved through the wood the way light moves through a glass of water. Holt stood in the doorway with his bag down at his side and watched this without announcing himself. He had trained himself, 15 years into the job, to observe the 3 minutes before people knew he was present, because those 3 minutes told him more than the 3 hours after. He watched Reed guide the boy's hand to the wood, watched the boy's face change when he felt the difference between the grain and the surface, watched Reed not reach over to fix what the boy did wrong, but instead wait until the boy found the correction himself. After a moment, Holt stepped in and made the ordinary sounds of arrival. Reed looked up without surprise. He nodded once, the way a man nods when he has been expecting a thing for a while, and he went back to the guitar side. While Reed worked, Holt moved through the space with the clipboard angled low, the way he did when he was trying not to seem like he was taking notes but was. At the workbench he stopped. Under a canvas tarp, a corner of which had been folded back to access the tools beneath, something was sticking out. Not a tool. A folder, cream-colored, the kind you bought at a stationery shop rather than a pharmacy. He did not lift the tarp. He did not ask what was underneath it. He looked at the tarp for a moment the way a person looks at a door that is slightly open, and he moved on. But on his way out he paused at the nearest toolbox, the one with the small green dinosaur on top of it, and he looked at the dinosaur for a moment that ran slightly longer than the visit required. He didn't say anything about it. He left, and the folder stayed under the tarp, and Reed did not mention it, did not offer it, did not reach for the single piece of paper inside it that would have changed every number in his file and answered every question Holt had not asked. He showed Archer instead how to hear the difference between a spruce top and a cedar top by tapping each one twice with his knuckle and tilting his head and waiting for the sound to tell him something. Archer tapped and tilted and waited, serious in the way only a 7-year-old is serious about a thing he has decided to understand. "That one's louder," Archer said. "That one's faster," Reed told him. "Louder's not the same as better. Faster means the sound moves through it quicker, gets to where it's going sooner. Some music wants that, some doesn't." Archer considered this with both hands flat on the wood. Holt, who had stopped in the doorway to write something on his clipboard, did not write what he had intended to write. He wrote something else, and folded the page over, and left. There was a woman named Sable Fitch, who worked out of a converted house on Church Street as a freelance A&R consultant, meaning she listened things for a living and told people whether the things they had made were worth the money they planned to spend on them. She had been doing this for 11 years, and she was good at it. In the way that people who trust their instincts more than their opinions are good at things. She had been given Reed's name by Sam Pruitt, the same way the label had. And she had been given it 6 months before the label called, and she had sat with that name on a notepad for 6 months, the way you sit with a name someone has told you belongs to a person you haven't met yet but probably should. She drove to the workshop on a Wednesday afternoon. She introduced herself in the gravel lot. A small woman with reading glasses pushed up on her head and paint on her left forearm that she didn't mention and Reed didn't ask about. She said she was there about the guitar bodies, specifically the 3 that had gone to a session in March, and that the studio engineer had called, in the particular language of studio engineers, very stupid good. She asked if she could see the shop. Reed rolled the door up, and she stepped inside, and she did not do what most people did, which was to look at the space. She looked at the work. She walked the perimeter slowly, stopping at each piece, and she had the hands behind the back posture of someone who has learned to look without touching and means it as a form of respect. At the bench she stopped. She looked at the piece he was currently working, a guitar top in Engelmann spruce. The grain so tight it looked like a ruled page. She looked at it for a while without speaking, which Reed appreciated, because most people filled silence with opinions, and this woman appeared to be doing something else with it entirely. "How long on this one?" she asked. 3 weeks, on and off." She nodded. She looked at it 3 more seconds. "How many do you have in process?" 4 in various stages, 2 already contracted." She looked around the shop again, this time at the space itself, the cot, the wood stove, the stegosaurus on the toolbox. She looked at these things the way Holt had looked at the tarp, like a person reading a sentence that is longer than it first appeared. "I'm going to be direct," she said, "because I don't have another gear." Reed waited. "There is a festival in September. Headliners, 2 of whom have been looking for a specific sound for their acoustic sets for 18 months. I know what that sound is because I've been listening to them not find it for 18 months. This," she touched the edge of the spruce top with one careful finger, not quite touching nearly, "is the closest thing to that sound I've heard in a decade of looking. I want to bring them here. Not to a showroom. Here." "Here," Reed said. "Here." She looked at the cot once more. "I'm not going to pretend I don't see the cot. I am going to tell you that the last luthier I brought someone important to see was working out of a garden shed in Asheville with a single bulb overhead, and that session changed his life in a way that a proper studio has not changed anyone's life in my experience." Reed was quiet. "I also want to see what's in that folder," she said. He looked at her. "The cream one under the tarp. I'm not going to pretend I didn't see that either." He pulled the tarp back. He opened the folder. He laid the contract on the bench beside the spruce top, unsigned, and he waited. She read it once quickly, and once slowly, the way she had looked at the guitar top. When she looked up, her expression had not changed, which told Reed she was someone who had learned to hold her face still at important moments. "This is from Alderman Music Group. Yes, this has been sitting here unsigned for 2 months." She looked at him. "Why?" Reed was quiet for a moment. "There's a custody hearing in October." If I sign this and the value becomes part of the record before the hearing, my attorney says it could be used to renegotiate the original settlement and complicate the custody recommendation, because I would no longer be the man the original file described. Sable looked at the contract. She looked at the spruce top. She looked at the green dinosaur on the toolbox. You have been sitting on a contract that would change your life, she said. To protect a custody case. I've been sitting on it to protect my son, Reed said. She put her reading glasses down from her head and on her face and looked at the contract one more time. Then she took them off and put them back up. I'm coming back Saturday. With 2 people you're going to pretend you've never heard of, and you're going to show them how you build a guitar body the same way you showed that boy how wood goes see-through in the light. Can you do that? Yes, Reed said. Good, she said. She picked up her bag. She stopped at the door. For what it's worth, and I know it's worth nothing right now in the specific way that matters to you, you're not the man that file says you are. I've read a few files in my time. They're usually wrong about the most important part. She left. The folder sat on the bench. Reed put the tarp back over it, and then he took the tarp off again, and he left the folder where it was, in the open, because he was tired of covering things. Holt came back on a Thursday, with what he called an additional review, which he explained was standard in cases where the residential situation was non-traditional. He stood in the doorway with the clipboard, but this time the clipboard was angled differently, closer to his side, and he was not writing yet. Talk to me, he said, not for the record. Just talk to me about how you see this working. Reed set down the plane he was holding. I see it working because I have always known how to make things work. Not on paper, with my hands. My father built this business in a building people told him was too small. In a town, people told him was too quiet, and he made enough to raise 2 kids and send one of them to school, and leave the other one something real. I am not going to make my son ashamed of where his father started. I'm going to make him understand that where you start is not the same thing as where you're going. Holt looked at the stegosaurus. That his? He said. He put it there the first time he visited. Holt wrote something down. He looked around the shop one more time, lingering at the bench, at the folder that was no longer under the tarp, at the contract Reed had not asked him to look at and not hidden from him either. He left without asking what was in the folder. He came back Monday morning with a question that was not on any form. He stood at the rolling door, not fully inside, and he asked it the way you ask a thing you have been turning over for days. Why haven't you used it? He said. Reed knew what he meant, because using it the way I'd have to use it right now would mean turning my son's life into a transaction, Reed said. And whatever else happens, I'm not doing that. Holt was quiet for long enough that the silence acquired some weight. You know you could lose the hearing, he said. I know, and you'd still, and I'd still. Holt nodded once, slowly, the kind of nod that means a person has just confirmed something they suspected. He left. He did not come back for 11 days. In those 11 days, Reed finished the spruce top and began the back and sides, book-matched, mahogany, and he taught Archer on their Wednesday how to hear the grain direction in a piece of wood by bending it slightly in both directions and listening for the difference. And Archer listened with his eyes closed the way some children do when they are trying to hear a thing that is almost too quiet, and he heard it, and he said, that way, and he was right. Kristen's attorney filed a motion to have Holt removed from the case. The filing cited his unscheduled visits, his unauthorized conversations with members of Reed's family, and what it called, in phrasing that had clearly been chosen by someone who billed by the hour, his evident personal alignment with the respondent's household situation. Attached to the motion was a paragraph noting that the county's contract with Holt's employer came up for review in the spring, and that the county had a strong interest in maintaining professional neutrality in sensitive family matters. It was not a threat the way a shout is a threat. It was a threat the way a long pause is a threat. Reed heard about it because a colleague of Holt's called, not officially, to let him know. Reed set the phone down on the workbench and stood looking at it for a while with both hands flat on the wood, the way Archer had stood with both hands on the guitar top. He drove to Holt's office and sat in the parking lot until Holt came out at 20 past noon, and Reed got out of the truck and said what he had come to say. Step back, he said. Recuse yourself. Tell them whatever they need to hear. I don't want your career to be the price of my case. You've been doing this work honestly for 15 years and I am not going to be the reason that ends." Holt looked at him for a moment. "You came here to protect me," Holt said. "Yes. The man who has everything to gain from me staying on the case." "Yes." Holt put his hands in his pockets. He looked down the street. The way a person looks when they are deciding something they mostly already know. "Here's the thing," he said. "In 15 years I've done this job carefully. I've stayed in the lane the court draws. I've filed what the evidence supports, and I have not filed what it doesn't." He looked back at Reed. "The evidence in your case supports a specific recommendation. I wrote it. It's got my name on it and I signed it yesterday morning, and I am not withdrawing it because someone with a city contract is unhappy about it." He paused. "Also," he said, "whoever filed that motion ought to know that I have already flagged the original evaluation in your case to my supervisor, because the original evaluation has problems that are hard to explain by accident. The photographs are missing. 2 of the required interviews are marked complete with no supporting documentation. I've been in this work long enough to know what a file looks like when someone moved through it quickly on purpose." Reed did not speak. "There's more," Holt said. "The access log on your file. Someone outside this office has been in it. Twice in the last month. I don't know yet who, but I know the account that did it, and I know it doesn't belong to anyone whose name is on the case." The thing Reed understood then was not just that someone had been inside the file. It was that the timeline he had been living, the refinancing in January, the truck in February, the filing in March, had not been a sequence of decisions. It had been a schedule. Kristen's mother was named Audra. She was 63, and she drove a sensible car, and she had the angular posture of a woman who had spent decades being right about things she wished she had been wrong about. She came to the workshop on a Friday morning and stood in the gravel lot for 40 minutes before Reed arrived, and when he pulled up she was still standing there, holding a manila envelope with both hands the way you hold something you can't put down. She said she had raised Kristen to be honest. She said she had spent 11 months telling herself the story of the divorce the way Kristen had told it to her, which was a story about a woman outgrowing a man who would not grow with her. She said she had stopped being able to tell herself that story in March, which was the same month Kristen had sent her a text message that Audra had read 3 times and not deleted. The message said, "The asset cliff lifts in 18 months. If we file now, the guitars are a hobby and he's a man in a workshop, and I get the house in primary and he gets Wednesdays and every other Saturday. If we wait, he's a contractor with a catalog worth real money, and I get half of it plus the house and we fight forever. Mom, I've done the math." Audra handed Reed the envelope. Inside was a printed copy of that message. Beside it was a financial disclosure 2 years old, with a projected value of the contract catalog attached to it in a note in Kristen's handwriting. Beneath that was a copy of a text exchange between Kristen and a friend named Donna that named, in plain language, the evaluator who had filed the original assessment in 11 days, and explained what had been offered to him in exchange. Reed read all of it standing in the gravel lot. "She is my daughter," Audra said, and her voice did not shake, which was its own kind of shaking. "I love her. I am not here because I don't love her. I am here because I watched her make a calculation out of a marriage to a man who built things carefully and who never once in 7 years said a word against her to that child. And I cannot be the person who knows this and says nothing. Whatever that costs me with her, I have decided it costs me less than the other thing." She folded Reed's hands around the envelope. He stood there for a while, after she left, in the gravel, with the envelope in his hands, and the rolling door behind him, stuck in its track the way it always stuck in the cold, which meant you had to lift and pull at the same time, and lean your weight into the left side. And Reed Calloway was the only person in the world who knew the trick of it, and he had learned it from his father, and his father was gone and the door was still there, and he leaned his weight in and pulled, and it opened. Inside, the stegosaurus was on the toolbox. The spruce top was on the bench. The folder was in the open. He called Holt. The hearing was scheduled for a Thursday in October. Kristen's attorney had moved it up once. Then a motion came through to move it again, pushed by the same firm that had filed against Holt, landing it on the second Tuesday of September, which was 4 weeks earlier than the original date, and which, Sable Fitch explained to Reed on a Sunday afternoon, was the exact week before the festival she had mentioned. the one with the two headliners who had come to the workshop 3 weeks ago and spent 4 hours watching. Reed built a guitar body and had left with a handshake deal that Alderman Music Group had subsequently put on paper, and which Reed had signed on a Monday morning with his attorney present, and which Alderman was planning to announce to the industry press on the morning of the second Tuesday of September. The people who had moved the hearing had not known this. They had moved it onto the exact morning the announcement would run. Sable said this on the phone and then was quiet for a moment and then said, "Someone very smart just made a very dumb mistake." The courtroom was small and overlit, the way courtrooms are when no one has thought about them as rooms. Kristen's attorney made the argument with the polish of someone who had made it before in different configurations and knew which words landed. Unemployed, unstable, residential environment unsuitable for a child, an original evaluation on file, conducted by a licensed professional, that the county had had every opportunity to review and had not. He read from it. He was still reading from it when Holt walked in, not as a witness for either side but as a professional filing a late correction to his report, which was his right under county procedure, and which Kristen's attorney had apparently not expected, because the attorney stopped reading and looked at his own counsel, and the two of them had a short, quiet exchange that resolved nothing. Holt filed the correction. It amended the residential assessment to reflect that the workshop met all safety and habitation requirements. As of 6 weeks prior, that the child had demonstrated a strong and secure attachment to the respondent consistent with healthy development, that the original evaluation contained multiple procedural irregularities consistent with an accelerated and incomplete process, and the XXX logs on the court file had been flagged for review by the county's IT department on the basis of unauthorized external edits. He signed it and handed it to the clerk. Then Audra walked the length of the courtroom and took the stand. She did not look at Kristen on the way up. She introduced the messages and the financial disclosure and the note about the evaluator under oath in a voice that did not require any more volume than it had. And she said, clearly enough that every person in the room could follow it, what her daughter had known, and when she had known it, and what the timeline of the divorce meant against the timeline of the catalog's value, and what had been offered to the man who had filed the original evaluation in 11 days. Without the photographs, and without the interviews. Kristen looked at the table. She looked at it the way you look at something, when the looking is the only remaining private thing available to you, the only place no one can follow. Sable Fitch was not in the courtroom. She was at her desk on Church Street, and her phone was on, and at 9:47 that morning, it lit with a message from the editor at No Depression, who was running the announcement. And the message said the piece had gone live, and she opened her laptop and read the headline twice before she believed it. The quiet genius behind Nashville's most sought-after acoustic sound. How a Murfreesboro craftsman built a catalog worth more than most studios. Reed's name was in the second paragraph. The workshop on Alderman Road was in the third. The spruce top he had been working the morning Sable first visited was in the photograph, half finished, on the bench, the grain so even it looked like something impossible. She sat with her coffee and read the whole thing and did not call Reed because Reed was in a courtroom, and she knew how to read a room even when she was not in it. When the judge asked if he had anything to say, Reed stood, and he said one thing. "I never wanted the house," he said. "I want my son. That is the only reason I am in this building. Nothing that went public this morning changes a word of that, and the only thing I have ever built that has mattered to me more than anything in that article is in that hallway right now, waiting, with my neighbor's daughter who is 13 and charges $5 an hour and takes the job seriously." In the hallway, Archer was explaining to the 13-year-old why the Stegosaurus was the most misunderstood dinosaur on account of the plates, which were not for fighting, and she was listening to him with the patience of someone who has been paid to do so and has discovered she would have listened anyway. The court restored joint custody, full and equal. It ordered a formal review of the original evaluation and flagged the file irregularities for the county's ethics board. The attorney who had moved the hearing twice sat very still for a long moment after the ruling, and then began gathering papers with the deliberate care of someone who needs there to be doing something. Kristen kept the house. She moved through it in the weeks that followed with a full understanding. new and permanent, of what she had failed to see when she had called the workshop sawdust and noise, which is a harder thing to live with than a workshop would have been, and takes up more space than any house has room for. Holt's contract came up for renewal in the spring. The county renewed it without incident, because the county's ethics board had concluded its review of the file irregularities by then, and the conclusions of that review had made certain conversations very quiet in certain offices, and quiet offices do not usually start additional fires. Sable called Reed on a Thursday, not about work. She said she was going to be in Murfreesboro and asked if the workshop would be open. He said it would. She said she had a broken bicycle she had been meaning to deal with for months, and that she had heard he fixed things, and wanted to know if that extended beyond guitar bodies. He said most things were the same principle. She brought the bicycle on a Saturday, a pale blue city bike, with a derailleur that had slipped its cable, and she stood in the gravel lot, while Reed looked at it the way he looked at everything, quietly, and from more than one angle. He had it apart in 12 minutes. He had it back together in 45, the cable rehoused and tensioned, the brake pads realigned, the chain cleaned link by link. Archer sat on an overturned crate and watched and offered opinions about whether the blue was the right color for a bike, which he thought was more of a question than people usually treated it as. Sable stood at the rolling door afterward with her hands around a cup of coffee that was still hot, and she watched the boy move back through the shop to the toolbox where the Stegosaurus lived. "He's going to be someone who fixes things," she said. "His grandfather was," Reed said. "It skips sometimes, then it comes back." She held the cup with both hands and looked at the workshop, at the spruce tops racked along the wall, at the toolboxes with the worn handles, at the notebook open on the bench, to a page of measurements in a hand she didn't recognize, columns of numbers soft with pencil. "What's in the notebook?" she asked. "My father's tolerances," Reed said. "The dimensions he used for every body shape. He kept them for 30 years and never varied them by more than a 16th. She looked at the page for a moment. "That's what makes your guitars sound like that. That's part of it. What's the other part?" He looked at the notebook. He looked at Archer, who had the Stegosaurus in his hand now, and was walking it along the edge of the toolbox, explaining something to it in a low voice. "You don't rush the wood," he said. "You learn what it wants to do and you help it do that. My father said a good guitar isn't built, it's listened into existence." Sable was quiet for a moment. "That's going in the next article," she said. He looked at her. The corner of his mouth moved. "I'll charge you for it," he said. She laughed, and the sound of it moved through the open door of the workshop and out into the gravel lot and the quiet street beyond it, where a pale blue bicycle leaned on its kickstand in the October light, newly fixed, waiting to go somewhere. They had taken the house on Alderman Road. They had taken the truck. They had taken his son for a season, on paper, in rooms where the light was the wrong kind and no one built anything. But the thing that had mattered most had never been in any document, which is precisely why no document had ever been able to take it. It had been in the notebook with the soft pencil columns. It had been in the 2 worn toolboxes and in the trick of the rolling door that only one person knew. It had been in a small green dinosaur on a piece of red wood, placed there by a 7-year-old who had walked into a garage his mother called useless and decided, without being asked and without needing to explain it, that this was where he belonged. Here is the question that will split the room. If the person who took everything from you came back wanting something, your forgiveness, your friendship, your time, after you had rebuilt every last piece of what they had taken, would you open the door, or would you leave them on the other side of it? Tell me below. I read everyone. If this story stayed with you, subscribe. I'll see you in the next one. This story is a work of fiction. The names, characters, places, and events are imagined. The dynamics within it, the use of asset timing before a divorce filing, coercive financial restructuring, and custody leverage against a parent with non-traditional income, reflect patterns documented in family courts across the country. If you or someone you know is navigating a custody dispute or divorce involving closely held business assets, speak with a family law attorney about your rights. Knowing what is yours is not a kindness you extend to yourself. It is how you keep it.